Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Freedom Project Media. Today, we are doing a second interview with Dr. Sandra Stotsky. Dr. Stotsky, as you know, is a very, very influential critic of Common Core. She was on the validation committee. She is also one of the foremost experts of English language arts development in the world. So, Sandy, welcome back. Glad to be with you again.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction.
And before we begin, we're going to talk today about departments of education, how we're training teachers at colleges and universities. This is a huge problem that nobody, and I mean nobody across the country, is talking about. So we're going to have a really great discussion about this. But before I do, Sandy, you have a book coming out. So give us the title of the book. Let's talk for a minute about what the book is and how people will be able to buy it. What is the title of your book and what's it about?
The first part of the title is Changing the Course of Failure. And like all academics, it has a colon at the end of it, and the rest of it is how schools and parents can help low-achieving students. And that's the end of that part of the title. The book is coming out in May from Rowman and Littlefield, I'm told. It's already there being copy edited. And it's basically focused on low-achieving students, as in the title. And it tries to suggest overall that we have been in this country focusing on the wrong set of institutions to try to address the problems of underachievement, massive underachievement in low-achieving adolescents. That's the focus of the book.
Sounds wonderful. And of course, you had implemented much of that book in Massachusetts before Common Core standards made their way in and destroyed it. So you have a lot of experience with this topic, and we're all looking forward to reading that. Maybe when the book comes out, we'll have you back on again to talk about it in greater detail. Does that sound okay?
That would be wonderful.
Good. Well, this is a fascinating topic, Sandy, and you mentioned the word colons. All academics have to have colons in their titles. Of course, a colon can also mean something else, and that is probably a very good place to start our discussion of what's going on in departments of education. I'm a professor of English, as you know. I've been for 25 years. One of my jobs over the last 25 years has been to train English majors who want to be education teachers. So one of the things that's always driven me crazy, Sandy, is that departments of education, they don't teach math to math students. They don't teach English to English students. So when a department of education, your daughter wants to become a high school English teacher, they send them to us, English professors. Your son wants to be a middle school math teacher. They send those kids to actual math teachers. And so really what you've got in the education departments is just a whole degree that's based on abstract theory. The actual intellectual coursework is done by different professors. And so there seems to be a gap between when they get their English and their math and their science versus what they're getting from departments of education, which seems to me to be nothing more than just a lot of abstract pedagogical theory. What are your thoughts on that?
You're right in the way you classify it. They are learning their academic coursework in the arts and sciences or engineering, a non-education school or department. And then they go to a school of education or a department of education for the pedagogy. And the pedagogy is supposed to show them how they would effectively teach the content of whatever kind of teaching license they're aiming for. This is the first breakdown area, as I see it, because we don't get the high-level, academically qualified students going into education that we once did many years ago in this country, sometimes even from high school graduation. We just don't get them going into education, and there are many studies that have shown the decline. I have those URLs in my new book.
I'm amazed. You know, you bring up a great point. At the schools I've taught at, and I've taught at major research institutions all the way to small liberal arts colleges, it is sad to say, it breaks my heart, but some of the worst students that I have are my education majors. They're worse than theater majors in terms of their commitment. They're worse than almost any other department. And what I find is a lot of kids who fail out of other endeavors. Kids who want to study math at a high level, they fail out, they become math teachers. Kids who want to maybe go on to get a PhD in English from a major university, their grades are so poor they can't do it, so they become a middle school English teacher. So we're getting that. We're getting, and I want to say, preface this. When you get a good education major, they're among the best students I have. When I get a very good education major, usually she is really, really committed and smart. But that's not the norm. The norm is it becomes a bottom-feeding program for kids who can't seem to do anything else. Talk a little bit about that. What, in your book and in your experience, what changed in education that forced so many of the better students to just reject that career altogether?
There are probably many changes going back to the 60s and 70s. The need to get more people into teaching to begin with, which meant that the bar was lowered a little bit, because one has to remember that there are, for most other professions, quality controls. Who gets in and who can get out. And there are usually tests at both ends. Think about medical training or law school. You have an exam at the beginning, and then you have a licensing exam at the end. And here is where we have fallen down. We have lowered the level at both ends so that almost anybody can get into a pedagogical training program as an undergraduate, sometimes directly from high school, although there's been an attempt to close down for elementary school teachers, prospective ones, the 4-year undergraduate program in pedagogy. And then we have had licensure tests in most states that are very weak in terms of the demand they make academically on what we know from research, by the way, is probably the single most effective trait of an effective teacher, and that is their command of the subject they teach. If we could get more teachers who actually were masters of the subject they taught, appropriate to the grade levels they planned to teach, we would have a better school system to begin with. That isn't all that's necessary. Some pedagogy is necessary, but not as many hours as began to be required back in the 60s and 70s, when gradually, as I could see here in Massachusetts, the number of credit hours that were needed for getting a degree in education began to increase. There was no knowledge base, for the most part, behind that increase in credit hours. As I say, we know from research that those who want to become teachers need to be masters of their subject matter, which means how good is the coursework they take in the arts and sciences, not the coursework they take in pedagogy. We've got it backwards now.
Well, Sandy, that's the big problem I see. I'm a professor of Shakespeare, and in the state of Wisconsin, Shakespeare is required in Wisconsin high schools. I think it's one of the wonderful remaining holdovers to classic education. And so any kid who wants to teach at the high school level English in Wisconsin has to take a Shakespeare course. I'm the university Shakespeare professor. Here's the thing that blows me away. These kids come to me, and their reading level, I've got college juniors and seniors. Their reading level is seriously about the 9th grade. They're 8th and 9th grade readers. This is by the time they're almost done with their degree program. And so I spend an entire semester with these kids teaching them how to read Shakespeare, how to read about the culture, how to understand the history, to become, in a way, masters of their subject. They then go back to their departments of education where they are told that none of that matters, that we're not teaching kids history. We're not interested in the Western tradition. We're not interested in teaching kids the great ideas. I have had students tell me directly that their education professors say things to them like, we don't really care if kids understand Shakespeare's writing in Shakespeare's world. What we care is, can you teach kids social justice? Can you teach them progressive social values in Shakespeare's books? So in other words, my kids are being told to take excerpts of Shakespeare. Don't even read the whole book, they're being told. Just take an excerpt that demonstrates racism or sexism or anti-Semitism and focus on that. That's what I'm seeing.
Right. And that is a good part of the problem. We no longer have high school level reading required of high school level students. And this has been especially true in the last 6 years under Common Core. It does not seem as if there are demands built in to the curriculum that get students from elementary or middle school reading, which would end about grade 7 level or 6 level, and get them into high school level reading, which it used to be the prerequisite for college level reading. That's still, according to readability formulas, grade 13 and up. We can't get most students up to that level who are going to become teachers. The reading level, as you pointed out, is too low for the English and the history teacher. After all, our founding documents were not written for people with PhDs. They were written for the ordinary or average citizen of the day who could understand the preamble to the Constitution, who could understand the Declaration of Independence and all those hard words in it. And now we have a problem teaching these founding documents to grade 11 and 12 students. We have teachers who themselves struggle to read these documents because they come into an education school or program with too low a reading level. Reading level is where I have been focusing my efforts for many years. And in the Department of Education, when I was actively there in the Massachusetts DOE, I was trying to raise the academic level of our licensure tests to strengthen the teachers, because if we were going to raise standards for all students, which was our goal, we weren't trying to close achievement gaps, we were trying to raise all kids' academic status. It turned out that we had to strengthen our teaching core, pre-service teachers, practitioners, those already in the schools, different things for different types of teachers. We had to work on how you make sure that those who teach know what they're teaching.
And that is a great observation. It's a wonderful summary you just gave. To me, the bigger problem is, I know, as political as English professors can be, and we can be among the worst, most English professors are convinced that they have to get kids to understand the books in front of them. That, we know, is what we try to do. However, what troubles me is when they go back to their education departments, it's not that these kids are being told that, you just have to improve your reading. They're being told that the kinds of things we're trying to teach them aren't important anymore. I've had math students tell me the same thing, that these kids will take math courses at a high level so they can teach math at a high level. The math professors do a really good job of holding the kids accountable and making sure they know their subjects. But then they go back to their education departments, and I had one student just last semester tell me that she was told point blank by her education professor that it doesn't matter how much math she knows, that the primary purpose of math as an education person is going to be teaching math in such a way that it gives them life skills, that you're giving kids an entree into a political world they never knew before. Math itself, it's not just English. And so when did we get to this point, Sandy, and what can we do about the fact that so many education colleges aren't interested in helping kids become first-rate mathematicians or first-rate readers? They're concerned about 1,000 other things, like multiculturalism, like social justice pedagogy, like using math and English to transform their worldview.
They've had other goals starting in the 60s or 70s. The focus of education programs in many of our education schools, not all of them and not all faculty members, there were always exceptions, but their focus was on how to help the very bottom, the low achiever, who needed some attention, but not at the price of what we did to the entire school system, because that was going to affect their level of achievement too. So we had that first problem of where their attention was. In beginning reading, which was my area of graduate work, so I knew what was happening there, the efforts were not in trying to make sure that all kids really learned how to read well by middle elementary school, which was when they used to learn how to read well, and then could become eager readers of the wonderful children's literature we've had in English for 200 years or so. But their efforts were directed towards getting kids just to be able to read first or second grade material. By middle school, we've had many changes, including the transformation of junior high schools into middle schools, and now we're going backwards again, trying to get grade 9 attached to the high school so that you have a 9 to 12 sequence that is taught by those who have actually majored in the subject, which used to be true in Massachusetts. They were the last to be put under licensure by the state legislature, because I began to follow, when did we begin to change the focus of the K through 8 grades and the teachers who taught them? And the first focus, as I said, was on low achievers. The second focus was then on ignoring higher achievers based on this spurious notion that they would do well anyway and in any setting, which isn't true. They're not doing that well. But that's where your future teachers, engineers, doctors, scientists, lawyers, bankers, whatever, that's where they come from. So you then begin a descent into becoming what people have called a third world country, because you don't have a large, well-trained middle class capable of, for example, just reading our founding documents, which they once were able to do. But the education schools, instead of keeping to a traditional pathway, which actually everyone gained from who was in our regular public schools, and in Massachusetts, all groups gained from whatever we did, but they began to focus only on the bottom, ignoring the top, and even changing what they meant by research, which is what my book also gets at, which is, what do we know from research about the various pedagogical strategies that have been tried out? From the federal level in particular, they've all failed. And even Betsy DeVos acknowledged that. If you recall, just a couple of weeks ago, she gave a talk at the AEI meeting, American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., in which she said, basically, all our federal reform efforts have failed. They haven't worked. So where do we go? If whatever we've tried to impose from the top down doesn't work, where do you go? Particularly if your education schools and the people they've trained who are in your state departments of education, and whoever is on state boards because they don't understand the high school curriculum at all. As I discovered, I was on the Massachusetts State Board for 4 years. If all of them are still back in the dark ages, so to speak, and trying to figure out how to get kids from grade 1 to grade 2 reading level, how do you raise up an entire school system with the wrong people in charge? Maybe we're focusing in the wrong direction. And I want to get a plug-in for the Coleman report, which came out in 1966. You may remember that. Do you remember the big hullabaloo from the Coleman report, which was done by a major sociologist? And he found that education inputs were less important than children's families. But what have we done on that side of the equation? We've put all our eggs into one basket, the education basket, and tried to make educators, teachers, accountable. We tried principals, that didn't work. We're trying teachers, that isn't working. How do we start looking beyond education and go to other ways of trying to strengthen the families that produce children who are able to learn to read, who are willing to learn to read, interested in learning to read, and who do learn to read because they're willing to read? There's no silver bullet. I'll stop right there.
Sandy, you did everything you just explained to us too explains Common Core, right? That you are shooting for a common education, you're ignoring the high achieving kids, you are prioritizing the kids that are unmotivated and incapable of reading at a high level. The whole thing you just laid out wonderfully. In the short time we have left, let me ask you this. As somebody who was a professor of education herself, if you could do one thing to change the ethos of, because the university departments of education have an absolute stranglehold on who gets hired, on who gets certified, who gets to student teach. And what I'm hearing from my kids is that unless you toe the political line, unless you buy into all of this revisionist educational pedagogy, unless you get on board with big federal interventionism, unless you privilege politics in the classroom over actual learning, you're not going to go anywhere. If you could change one thing in education departments across the country, what would you do that would make this situation better?
I would, if I were in charge of it all, abolish the education degree, the master's degree in particular, that is awarded to teachers for completing some coursework in pedagogy, which may or may not be related to the subjects or the grade levels they teach. But getting rid of that degree and making sure that every prospective teacher passes an exam by the department they have majored in. That's all we know from research. You have to know the subject you teach. Let the departments at each college give a department-based exam, as for example in yours, it would be an English exam that the English professors in that department would grade to see how many could pass the set of courses they require for their major. Their reputations would be on the line, and schools could only hire those who passed and could show that they could master and had mastered the subject they were planning to teach. That was what we depended upon years ago from all the liberal arts colleges that we had in Massachusetts. There were no pedagogical requirements, no teacher's license. They could go directly into the high schools to teach. Most of my high school teachers, when I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, came directly from the wonderful liberal arts colleges in the New England area. They didn't have one pedagogical course under their belt. They were there to teach at the high school level academic coursework, and all they had behind them was a major in the subject they were teaching. That was how it worked until almost the 1960s or 70s. Hundreds of years. It worked very well.
What a revolutionary idea. Let teachers be measured and hired solely on the basis of how well they teach their subject area. What you're basically saying, Sandy, it sounds to me, is pretty much get the education degree off the table. I think that makes sense. I think we in the English department would do a better job preparing kids to teach English than these education professors are. I agree with you 100%. I'm going to give you the last word and then we're going to sign off. But it makes common sense, which means it's probably never going to happen, right?
It means that we have to shift back to a focus on content. I've been using that word and talking about it for dozens of years. So have some other educators, not all of them, but a few who have a deep understanding of what students need to know in order to become critical thinkers. Can't think in a vacuum, an intellectual vacuum. You have to know something about the various areas in the school curriculum. What those areas should be can be a subject of debate. Should it be math and science and certain kinds of history courses? Whatever it is, the people who teach those courses should be judged by the mastery only of the content of the field. For a change, that would bring a lot of relief to K-12.
Dr. Sandra Stotsky, thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to talking to you again when your book is out. If you enjoyed this video and all of our videos, please consider a tax-deductible donation so we can keep the whole thing free for you. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.